welcome everyone to this webinar about supply planning and optimization. For today, we'll start off with some brief introductions. Who are these panelists? Which perspective are they representing? Then we will go into the real panel discussion where we talk about the current challenges, some best practices from their experience and some real world approaches that you can learn from. And then we will go into the actual Q&A part. So if you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A section, and at the end, we will have a look at these, direct them to the different panelists. So first of all, I want to thank and welcome each of the different panelists who all represent a different perspective as well. So first of all, there is Cristina Radu, who is based out of the Netherlands. She will be representing the solutions implementation perspective. She's implemented a lot of different optimization solutions, such as OMP, Archiva, O9, Anaplan, and she has as a background a PhD in math. So very much welcome, Cristina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ben, for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversations.
Yes, me too. Then second, we have Andreas Feldmann, who will be representing the academia perspective. Andreas is based out of England. He has a background PhD in computer science and has been a researcher and professor on operations research for quite some years, and currently also consulting different companies on the topic of optimization. So welcome, Andreas. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And then the third panelist is Johan, who will be representing the industry perspective. Johan is based out of the Netherlands as well, has a background in industrial engineering, and has been in supply planning and supply chain management roles at different kinds of companies like Eastman Chemical, Unilever, Leduc Fine Food, and many others. So thank you for being here, Johan. Looking forward to your perspectives.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, and then very briefly, myself, Ben van Delm, based out of Belgium, background in economics and management information systems, co-founder of Horizon, an advanced planning platform. And my role for today will be to moderate the discussion and to guide the Q&A at the end as well. Now, before we go into the real discussion, just very briefly, some loose definitions up front so that all of the attendees are a bit on the same page about what we mean. With supply planning, we're not talking about the demand planning part, for instance. We're not talking about actual operations. Some people confuse these different things. It's really about translating the demand into specific inventory positions, production quantities, and some define it more broadly, so want to achieve other plans as well. But the optimization perspective is really about a structured approach to make optimal decisions from a mathematical perspective through heuristics, so specific methods, approaches, or real mathematical solvers, typically with equations where you include specific constraints for a business. Okay, so supply planning, you can create a plan, but it might not be the best plan. Optimization can take care of the best plan, but it's always around a specific objective, about minimizing or maximizing something specifically. Now, very briefly, I want to mention Optimization for All, which is an initiative that was launched a couple of days ago by a group of people, amongst which are Cristina and Andreas. I think it's a great initiative because they want to make the topic of optimization accessible and understandable for people of different disciplines, so business people, researchers, and actual planners. So be sure to check that out as well afterwards, I would say. With that introduction, let's start with the actual panel discussion. We will not be using any slides for this. We'll have a real discussion like humans, let's say. And we will start with the situation as is, so with the current challenges. And for that, I want to start with Johan's perspective on how is supply planning and optimization in some companies currently being done, and what are some challenges with that you see?
Yeah, so thanks Ben for that. What we see today in many companies is that most of the planning is still done within Excel, right? So even if you go towards tools like OMP, Archiva, and the name, you still see that planners tend to revert back to Excel because they need, or they think they need, flexibility because the data is crappy, or the tool is there, but they don't understand what the tool is telling them. So they go back because they need to explain why things are the way that they are. And I think that is what we see a lot today in the as-is situation, where you see tools are being implemented, but it's very difficult to get there. I think that is, and I think another part is what you see is around skill gap. Sorry about that. My cat is
that's fine. An extra panelist in there.
In front of me.
The cat, but
yeah. No, so the skill gap is also something what you see a lot, right? You still see a lot of planners that are being trained at the vocational educational level, but to understand the optimization tools, you need to have a different kind of skill set in your pocket to be able to understand what the tools are doing. And also there you see that people revert back to the known tools like Excel to make their plans instead of using the more elaborate tools.
Yeah, okay, clear. So it's currently mostly done in Excel by a lot of companies, even if they have some tool in place. For some it works well, some do revert back because of flexibility, explainability, and skill gap. Okay, thank you for that. Cristina, from your perspective, when you do these kind of implementations, what are some struggles that you have seen?
One of the things that come to mind, and I think it's the biggest, is there is not a common language. There is a gap between the technical people and the business people. And when the technical people don't understand the business and the business doesn't understand how the technology can support their work, there is a lot of unhappiness, let's say. And why does this happen? So there are two reasons. So on one side you have, many times when you sell the project or you want to implement the software, you talk to seniors from the vendor. So they are seniors, they know the technical, they know the business, you feel like you're speaking the same language. But when the implementation starts, including the design, more junior people come, and they are not as knowledgeable in business, which of course makes sense because they haven't been in the industry. So they are technically good, but they don't understand the business processes, what kind of activities happen, in which order, who does what, and so on. And this is a problem. On the other hand, if you use implementation partners, like a consulting company to help, they come a bit from the other side. They are more business experts, they have been in the industry, but they are not familiar with the tools. But like really familiar, meaning have they ever implemented a tool from scratch to clean up the data, to implement the data, and so on, so they know features, functionality, but they don't know the technical. So there is a gap there, which I notice this is what creates issues.
Okay. So clear gap between technical business people, and then two reasons. You have senior people initially involved, then juniors don't know about the business, or implementation partners who don't know the deep technical parts either. So it creates some, okay. Clear.
And then the solution to this, it would be to, and this is what I noticed in the last 2 years, a lot of companies, they start to hire in-house experts, which have a certain experience, and then they choose them and say, well, that person has used at least 2-3 softwares, so they have a bit of variety. They also have been in industry for 10-15 years, so they understand the business processes. And if we hire them as in our projects, they can challenge. They can challenge the technical requirement, the technical functionality, but they can also challenge a bit the business and say, hey, look, maybe here you can do things like that. So such a person could bring a lot of more clarity and I would say more solutions. Like when you think, well, what should I do in this situation? A person coming from outside, which doesn't have any interest for the implementation partner, for the vendor, from so on, then you can get more solutions, more options, and then you choose whatever you think is best.
Yeah, okay, good. So in-house experts as a potential solution immediately. We will come back to this when we talk more about the best practices and real-world approach. No, it's fine, good. We can talk about it later as well. But maybe at first, from Andreas' perspective as well, from academia, what have you seen as some difficulties, challenges, perhaps in bringing some tools to the audience, letting them use it, or any other challenge that you've seen really?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a lot of development in the past, well, probably a couple of decades in terms of the research really coming into being implemented into tools. So we have a lot of tools nowadays. And I mean, one thing that's kind of striking, right, is that a lot of people who work in optimization nowadays, they have like a PhD. And well, obviously there's nothing wrong with that, but in the end, it's a bit striking because it's maybe not really so complicated to set these things up. And well, I think this has historical reasons. Like back in the day, it used to be like, okay, you don't only have to model the problem, you also have to actually implement the actual solver for it. And for this, you need some really deep understanding of the mathematics and how it actually works. But nowadays, you know, I mean, there are more and more tools out there, and I think we'll see even more of those being able to solve more and more complex problems. I mean, you mentioned linear programs earlier, but you know, then you can think about quadratic programs. There are tools for that already. Maybe then in future we'll have tools for convex problems and things like that. So more and more complicated things will be solvable. And well, to get there, I think, I mean, on one hand, obviously the tools have to be built, and that's an ongoing thing. And on the other hand, I mean, you need to educate people, right? You need to educate people in particular on the modeling side. And for this, yeah, I think, I mean, from my perspective at universities, I think it's just not taught enough, unfortunately. This topic is kind of still very niche, even in like computer science where I teach. It's just kind of a side. I mean, it depends on the university, right? But I mean, it can sometimes just be something that the students see somewhere, and maybe they've heard of it, but then they forget about it because it's, you know, in a huge pile of all the other stuff that they learn. So it's yeah, definitely a challenge there as well to educate people.
Okay, so you would say more tools are getting available, so more problems can be solved. However, getting them in the hands of the actual users, that's still a difficulty. And it touches also a bit on the initial problem which Johan explained there, which is the explainability, the ability to understand it. So Andreas, to get those tools to the actual user. So if we now talk about, okay, we discussed a bit of the issues from different domains, but if we talk about how can these be overcome? So how can these tools be brought to the users? What are some crucial elements that you see there to make them understand and use it?
Yeah, right. I mean, you mentioned the keyword explainability, right? I mean, this of course is important. I mean, like a planner wants to explain to the management why this particular solution is in place, right? And so the planner also has to understand kind of what the tool is producing. And I think, I mean, when it comes to explainability, I think there are kind of two things we can talk about. I mean, one thing is understanding or explaining, in that case, the actual model, as in what are the constraints and why is the solution based on the rules that we impose on the model.
Yes.
And I mean, there, of course, you know, educating people in modeling definitely helps. And maybe AI can also play a role here, because in the end, an AI can potentially read these rules and also like then explain in written words so that a human being can understand it, what they actually mean, right? So that's definitely one thing. And then on the other hand, you can talk about explaining the computed solution itself, right? So the actual plan that the solver spits out. Maybe that's a little bit more complicated, I would say. But there are approaches to that. I mean, in particular, okay, when it comes to algorithms in general, there is a research area that's called explainable algorithms, and there, you know, people make an effort to compute solutions which come with an explanation of some sort. And you have maybe seen that even in AI when you use an LLM, like ChatGPT or something, you can ask it to explain the solution. So it would be something like that, right? It doesn't just give you the answer, but it also explains how it got there. And I mean, this explanation in LLMs can be correct or not. That's a different topic. But for solvers itself, I think what you can do there is maybe some what if analysis. You can say like, oh, I see the solution, but why my intuition tells me that maybe this, I don't know, this should look a bit different. And what if I just fix this in the solution and compute what the rest would look like, and then compare these solutions to look at why it makes sense somehow.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Go ahead, Johan.
And yeah, indeed, when talking about explainability, I think what is most important is that in the end, that as a planner, you need to go to your leadership and explain why you are proposing a certain plan. So why are the choices that you are proposing for them to decide, why are those the right choices to make? And I think that is the most, maybe also the most difficult part, but that is also the most important part of any kind of optimizing tool that we are using. Because if a planner is not capable of explaining why we need to do a certain supply plan or do a certain purchase plan, and he can't explain why the system is proposing that, then you see that the management says, okay, go back, do your homework, because they want to understand why they are making a certain decision. 9 out of 10 times, they're not questioning the model itself. They're questioning, why do I need to make this kind of decision? Because there is money at the table. And I think that is why you still see that we still go back to Excel, because that is where the planner has his understanding and he knows what he is doing. And that's what you see a lot, that they either take the results, go back to Excel, make a compute themselves, and then go back to management to explain, this is why I am proposing this solution. And I think that is that's the most important part. And if we can't, as specialists, if we can't teach the planning community how to explain those results, then it will stay a niche product. So I think that there's where, and I do think we can use AI there, because then at least you can make it explainable instead of getting all kinds of mathematical formulas.
So, like Andreas pointed out, there are 3 parts. The actual model, what are the constraints? So what kind of business requirements are taken into consideration? Is the model complete in that sense from a business perspective? Where if that's a document where these are outlined, the rules in text, okay, maybe an LLM could have potential to explain that. Secondly, when we talk about the computed solution itself, the actual equation and details to how it's optimized, that might be more difficult for an LLM. And then there's the what if analysis, where, okay, you try out different things, you see how does it evolve, is it reasonable? The algorithms, the explainable algorithms, is that something, Cristina, that you have seen, or how have you seen this explanation from the actual tools to the users in practice?
So before I answer to that question, I want to say something which maybe most of you know, that optimization is perceived as a black box. And what does it mean? It means that people think that you cannot explain the results. But that's not correct, because mathematics, that's the nature of mathematics, is precise. If you have an equation and an input data, you know what's coming out of it. So this is not the reason that we should not implement optimization tools, because we cannot explain them. We can explain everything. You always trace back to the data or one of your equations if there is something wrong in the model. And about the explainability, but let's say you need an expert who can spend 2 days to find the issue. But I've seen in some softwares which invested time and money to develop a tool. This was even 10 years ago, so without AI, which was pinpointing the issues, because let's say 80% of the time it's always the same issue, the same type of data, capacity is not correct, or rate is, So they had this kind of decision tree. Did you do this or did you do this? When you did this, did you see this or did you see this? And so on. And in a few minutes, they were able to alone, without an expert, without a consultant, detect the issue and fix it. and 99% of the time is data. So